I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. All right, everybody, I did it. I did my event this past weekend, and I will stop talking about it, but it was so fun. For those listening, if this is your first time, I produced an event for queer women here in Seattle. I partnered with the podcast, and it went really well. We had Friday welcome activities at a brewery, and then we went to the Rain game, and then Saturday was at the Reverie Ballroom. It was beautiful. I think we had about 150 people, which is what it felt really good in the space. And then, I don't know, for those that don't know this about events, they are expensive. I think overall cost, if I'm including everything, is almost $6,000, $5,500, something like that. And with ticket sales, didn't quite break even, which was not necessarily my goal, but I was expecting that and planning for that. So I think it just goes to show, when you think about ticket price being expensive, it really doesn't cover much. And that's where sponsors really come in. So if I did it again, I think I knew that. I just didn't put a focus on sponsors, but I think I would probably put a heavier focus on sponsors next time. But it was great. People flew in from New York, from Arizona, from San Francisco, and Canada. I did not expect people to be coming from that far out. So that felt really good. And then I'm flying out to Chicago tomorrow to work an event for that tech client. So those are my updates. Sitting next to me, who also probably knows a bit about ticket prices, is Ben London, CEO of Sonic Guild. Hi, Ben.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. I think last time I saw you, we got coffee in Pioneer Square. It was a while back.
Yes, it probably was. It was, I'm trying to remember, was that before or after the pandemic?
I think it was after. And I was working unofficially with a musician here in Seattle. I was trying to, Caitlin's born. I was trying to pick your brain about, do I want to go into the music industry? What is that like? And that kind of thing. So
my answer is usually, do I want to go into the music industry? And the answer is no. Yeah. You should only go in if you can't not go into the music industry.
I love that. You're forced, you're compelled.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Well, a little bit about you, if people don't know. You're, like I said, CEO of Sonic Guild, which we'll talk about a little bit. And prior to that, you were the executive director of the Pacific Northwest chapter of the Recording Academy, which puts on the Grammys.
Correct. Yeah, the Grammy organization.
You were a part of the team that developed what's now known as MoPop.
Correct, yeah.
You're a musician yourself, and you were on the advisory board of KEXP, and you were the first chair of the Seattle Music Commission.
It's true.
All true.
It's true. I was joking at a meeting last night that I said if there was a punch card for music jobs in Seattle, I would get a free sandwich by now.
I know. And I've been wanting to do a music industry episode for a while. And I was like, I don't know, who can speak to kind of all sides of it? And I was like, of course, Ben. So
I'm one of the few that's not a realtor at this point. Yeah. That's the trajectory for most people in the music business.
That's the pipeline, yeah. So tell me what is Sonic Guild and how did it come to be?
Sure. So Sonic Guild is a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to support the creation and performance of new music by exceptional local musicians. So the reason or the pathway that I came to being involved with Sonic Guild was, as you mentioned through my CV, I've been really involved with music in a variety of different levels over the years. And, through a lot of the different work we did with these different organizations and things, we did a lot of work on music education, music business education, these different things. And we really found the one constant in all these conversations we had about this stuff was money. Right? Like we can all day long tell you what you should do, and this is, I'm of the age where I'm the pre-digital and the post-digital world in this space as well, right? And so nothing's worse than saying, oh, well, here's how you build a career. You do this, this, and this. And then the person's like, well, I don't have any money to do that. And so I heard about Sonic Guild in 2018. It was launched in Austin, Texas in 2013. And I went down and met with them and I was like, this is what Seattle needs. I mean, this city is changing so fast. It's more expensive to live than it ever has. And if we're not careful, it's going to end up being a sort of monoculture here of just sort of people that can afford to work in technology, and any of the arts and culture and things that made the city a really vibrant and desirable place to be, it was going to evaporate before our eyes. And so they trusted me in stewarding, bringing it here. And I'm happy to say that we've grown year over year. We launched right into the pandemic, but in spite of that, we've grown. I think in some ways that helped focus the community's understanding of the role music plays and how musicians particularly get impacted in these economic downturns. You talk to anybody, like more than likely you were able to continue doing your job during the pandemic. You were on a laptop, you could do Zoom meetings. Nobody really wants to watch musicians perform over Zoom.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to do that. And We've built a community that we're trying to expand all the time, but we give grants to musicians to do everything from make records, go on tour. We offer free music business education in conjunction with that, and we're just trying to create another concentric circle of community beyond what already exists to create this entity that can help support the next generation of musicians and also engage maybe music fans that traditionally have aged out of being involved with local music,
And the grants is one of your like flagship programs, and remind me, it's 10,000 for 10 artists a year?
Yeah, well, actually, we've expanded on this. So this year, in 2025, will be our most robust year of giving to date. And so we will do $100,000 in grants. That's $10,000 grants. And then we gave out a new grant line, a tour support grant line, where we gave out $36,000 to 25 artists that resulted in over 225 tour dates in the U.S. and Europe. We also have a new producers grant that a donor is funding, the George Reef Producers Grant, that allows well-known producers to work with emerging talent that otherwise would not be able to work with them. Mm-hmm. And then we have our ongoing partnership with Bloodworks Northwest and doing their Music's in Their Blood campaign, where we awarded another $12,000 in grants for participation in that. And then we have the performance fees for our events. We had an amazing live record partnership with the Seattle Theater Group, where we helped determine an artist that got to record a live record at the Neptune that will get released later this year. And so in aggregate, just in money distributed to musicians is over $230,000 this year.
That's incredible.
And that's just for Seattle.
I think I got a good inside look when working with Kate, because so many gigs, I'd realize, how low the pay is for so many gigs. And for example, she opened for Pat Benatar at, I think it was Paramount. So massive.
Let me guess. Did she get $500?
$300. It was a trio. So $300 for a trio. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. So downtown, that covered just about their parking.
Exactly.
For 3 vehicles.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And everyone I think I told you this, and you're like, yeah, I'm not surprised. But I wish, because obviously and then, some of the gigs at the restaurants, it's like $100, $200, like it's just so low. And then we were talking about, she hadn't put music out in a while. And I was like, well, let's just put it on Spotify, because I don't know anything. And she was like, no, we'd need like thousands of dollars. And I think people don't realize that, because you can record something on your phone, but if you're doing it studio quality and paying really incredible musicians, we raised $12,000 for her to put out an EP. And I just don't think people understand how expensive it can be to be an artist.
Yeah. And just how many things have to go right.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the creative fields like that, it's one thing going wrong can be catastrophic, and so many things have to go right to kind of break through to that next level, right? And so we see artists in our community that have elevated over the years, and for a Macklemore or a Brandy Carlisle or any of those folks to kind of move up to that next level, so many things have to happen, but none of those artists go straight from their basement to Climate Pledge Arena. Mm-hmm. You have to come out of a community of a couple hundred musicians all working, playing together, doing all that stuff. And, not everybody's going to make it to the mountaintop, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum either, right?
No, yeah.
And so when you start killing off the ecosystem, or the ecosystem isn't able to function, you lose that ability to develop talent. It's no different than, how many startups start here every year, mm-hmm. And how many people end up getting B-level or C-level fund, whatever that might be, or go on and all of a sudden, and so every young person that's trying to do a startup has stars in their eyes that they're going to be the next. You tell me who's the biggest, latest one. But it's the same way that everybody thinks they're going to get there. And and the great thing about music and the music business is that even if you don't get there, you learn such an amazing array of skills that can be applied to so many other industries. And I joked about being a realtor, but so many people that are musicians, they're creative, they make the most amazing project managers you would ever meet in your entire life, because they're used to managing and about 1 million different details, putting it into thing. The show must go on. Mm-hmm. They're not freaked out by the pressure or the stress,
pressure,
all that sort of stuff. And so I think it's important, it'd be like us saying, oh, we're going to get rid of all high school and college athletics because, we already have the Seahawks. Why do we need that, right? But if you're not only developing the participants themselves, but you're developing the fan base for the for the
That's
sport
it's a
as
really
well.
good
And that's the
comparison.
same with music. People have
Yeah.
to participate at a variety of different levels. And
Yeah.
last thing I'd say is, and no disrespect, nobody walks down the aisle to a podcast.
What? So true. So true. All right. We've got 4 articles and we're going to keep talking about the music industry.
Yeah.
It's heavy on the music industry this week. And there wasn't really that many big stories. Obviously, the AWS outage, but I feel like that's being covered in a lot of places. So we're going to focus a little bit more on the entertainment side of things. So the first one is just a general state of the music industry. There was a census that came out. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about a fun little quote that the CEO of Live Nation said about ticket prices. So we're going a little national, but it does obviously affect Seattle. Our third story is about a Broadway kind of workforce union deal that went through. And then our last one is about a nonprofit moving into an Amazon space. So, like I said, the first one, the Washington Nightlife Music Association, which was formed during the pandemic, did their first ever census. And I thought that was smart because if you want to make any kind of changes or talk to legislation and get things changed, you have to have the data to support it. So their whole thing was kind of understanding what impact does live music have and what's going on. So, I have 2 stats that I'm going to mention here, but feel free to say what you've stood out to you. But the live music industry generates $6.4 billion annually. And this is, we're talking about Washington, surpassing spectator sports, which surprised me. And obviously creating a lot of jobs. The other stat that stood out to me was that musicians earn only 29% of their income from music, and many are leaving because of high costs, meaning, and I see this too, is they're working musicians at night and then they're going to some odd job in the daytime and, all of that. So it's not, they can't make a living off of just being a musician.
No. And, I think there's, if you were to talk to the layperson, they might be like, well, why should they, nobody gets to do their dreams and make a living, I'm working in an office. I don't get to my dreams. But there's a misunderstanding or, as you kind of mentioned when you were talking about what you thought the artists you worked with would get paid. If you're standing even in a small venue, you're looking up at that stage and somebody's performing, it's moving the DNA around, making you feel something, the light's shining down them, and you're thinking, boy, that looks so good. I'd love to be that artist. I'd love to have that life. And I always encourage people to take that one step further. It's like, let's wait till the show's over and watch that musician load their equipment into a 25-year-old car and go back to their studio apartment that has and have no health insurance. So both things can be true at the same time. And so what we're seeing, and it's always been this way, I mean, any kind of art, you've got to you got to get your hustle on and do all that sort of stuff to make it. But the challenge is that some of the iterative income sources that musicians relied on over the years are getting taken out of the ecosystem in some ways. So,
like what?
Once streaming took over as the dominant form of music consumption, it used to be you could spend $1,000, press up 1,000 CDs, sell them for $10 a pop off the stage or the trunk of your car, and you'd be making money back. Whereas like now you can get 1 million streams on Spotify for one song, and you'll maybe get about $4,000.
Right.
So how do you get, again, from the basement to the point where you can build something? And unless unless the tooth fairy loves your music and drops checks off or something like that, or, you have a trust fund or rich benefactors of some sort, how do you build a career?
So you've worked in this industry a long time, and specifically in Washington, and the census is kind of talking about where we're at now, but how have you seen the industry change over the years? And I saw on your LinkedIn that you said, like, we can't go back to the 90s. So what did you mean by that, and, like, how has it changed?
Totally. Well, when I said that, I was on a panel recently to celebrate the closing of the Nirvana exhibit, and Chris Novoselic was there and talking about their success with Nirvana and everything. And there was a lot of questions from the crowd about, like, how do we make it like the 90s again? And my response was, it'll never be like the 90s again. And it's not because the music can't be good and impactful. It's that what happened in the 90s was, you got to think about Seattle was kind of a sleepy city that wasn't on the radar for most people. When I moved here in 1989, I rented an apartment. I had a studio apartment that cost me $175 a month.
Wow.
Right? And so I could work in a food service kind of job. I made pizza 3 or 4 days a week and cover my rent and my living expenses and have time to be a creator. The other thing is that, as I mentioned, the whole music infrastructure has changed in terms of how people consume music. But the biggest thing is just like the cost of living. It can't be the 90s here because nobody can afford to live here and create like they did in the 90s.
Yeah, it's so true. So I want to talk about your time at the Recording Academy. I had a call with the person who now has your position.
Yeah.
And I was trying to understand like what she does. And I didn't realize a lot of it is getting laws and policies changed. And one thing she, for example, was, I can't remember exactly, but it was something about parking next to venues and loading zones because it was becoming difficult for musicians. They'd have to find parking far away, or they'd have to pay for it, or they'd get a ticket. So she was trying to get some sort of law passed for that. Do you have an example of some sort of like tangible changes that you made at the Recording Academy or that you would like to see made to help musicians?
Well, gosh, I'm trying to think. Like, probably more of the stuff that we were involved with when I was there was more national-based stuff, and this was a lot about that digital transition in terms of payment, whether it was for satellite radio or things of that nature. I think that, at the end of the day, in the challenges in Seattle are the same challenges for musicians that are for everybody else. Is it's just a lot more expensive to live here and to function, right? And so let's think about a nightlife district. We're sitting in Capitol Hill right now doing this interview, that there was a time when you could drive over here, park from 5 p.m. on or 6 p.m. on for free. There'd be venues, but you could get over here. I mean, if you come here on a weekend night, it's so crowded. And if you're a musician, you have to load your gear. You can't find a spot 6 blocks away and then carry your heavy amplifiers and gear all the way over to the venue and back. And, there's been a lot of discussion over the years about like, well, we need to find ways to subsidize housing for artists and musicians. And, the tough thing about that is it's hard to create a subsidy for a specific class. There's all kinds of people that need subsidized housing in some way or another. So the things where I think the city could be really impactful will be like, let's take some of this empty real estate and turn it into creative space. Let's turn it into practice spaces. Let's turn it into things that would support people. If we can't affect the amount of they're paying for rent, similarly, there's some other orgs that are trying to work on health insurance and things like that. I mean, in the work I do, I'm sort of like, that's above my pay grade. Our organization cannot solve the healthcare crisis in America. But here, let's rather than waiting for one perfect solution, let's find iterative approaches that we can try to backfill and create opportunities for people to find more success that they than they might have otherwise.
Yeah, the rehearsal space is definitely something I realized. I started this thing called the pickup sessions where I'd pre-select the songs. You're a musician, you sign up, like you're a drummer, you sign up, whatever, but I needed a space. And that's when I realized like how hard it is to find a space, especially affordable. Yeah. But one more question on this and we'll move on. Yeah. But part of the census talked about the lack of diversity in the industry. So it said that it's 70% male and about almost 80% white. And it calls out specifically club promoters and venue owners. So they're kind of the gatekeepers of who plays at some of those shows. How have you seen that in your industry, and I guess how that relates to Sonic Guild? Because I know you choose your honorees and all that.
I guess what I'll say is that I think this is representative of the music space, but I think it's probably the representative of the business space in general in a lot of ways. That, if you look at the leadership in a lot of Fortune 500 companies, it's predominantly white and male, and that, there's a lot of work or people trying to create new opportunities for people within that. I will say that one of the contrasts that I see from the 90s, being an active music participant then to now, is that, and I talk to people all this time, is that, when I toured, when I was playing here in Seattle back in the days, it was not uncommon for 3 or 4 bands to be on a bill. It was all bands made of 3 to 5 white guys loading their gear onto the stage and playing every night. And I know, just going out in the city now, it's rare that I see a band with 4 white guys standing on a stage anymore. Yeah. So it feels like there's a lot more representation on the stage, but it hasn't necessarily trickled down into the booking agents and the club ownerships. And that's, again, back to that thing about who has access to capital, who can take those risks to open up a nightclub or a music venue. And that world itself is getting so much harder and harder. Like, I'd say to any of your listeners, like, how much has your car insurance gone up in the last 3 years? That's like every music venue that has to carry massive liability insurance and things like that. Not to mention the cost of labor going up, the cost of goods, what a beer costs from a wholesaler and what they can sell it for. And just, if you were to adjust what the ticket price, the average ticket price to get into a local venue is probably like $15 for local bands or something like that. If you adjusted for inflation, it should probably be $30. But nobody can. The audience isn't going to pay that.
Let's talk. Perfect transition. Let's talk about ticket prices. So the next one is a lot of different national news publications picked this up, but the Live Nation CEO was interviewed, and he said basically tickets are underpriced, which is just not what we've been hearing from that the Ticketmaster, Live Nation discussion with the government and Taylor Swift and all that kind of stuff. We've been hearing about how expensive they are. But he says, no, I think they're not expensive enough because...
Well, ironic that he says that being in the ticket selling business, right?
I know.
That he's speaking to his shareholders or the people that do that, and that there is a lot more juice to be squeezed from the fruit that way to do that. Mm-hmm. But if you think about their world, they're just trying to maximize revenue.
Yeah.
So they don't really care how that's done. And so if you're Ticketmaster, or any of the ticket sellers, not only do they sell tickets, but they're involved with the resale market too. So what they're seeing is, like, for Taylor Swift's a great example, that people here's the saying that on the Eras tour, the average secondary price was between $1,600 and $3,800 for a ticket, with some fans paying $5,500 for a Taylor Swift ticket. So in their minds, they're thinking, well, if StubHub is getting $5,500 for a ticket, we should be getting that. Mm-hmm. The challenge for me, and maybe I'm a communist or something, but I feel the same way about airplanes or anything else. Like, it used to be, if you really wanted a great ticket, you got up early and you stood in line and you had a chance of getting a great ticket. And just everything has become tiered in America now, where, I just think about so much of my formidable music experiences were being a young person. And what is that like for, like, a young person if half their class's parents had enough money to send them to the Taylor Swift concert? They love Taylor Swift just as much as them, but they don't get to go. Mm-hmm. And, what is that like, and that it just is another example of kind of the haves and the have-nots. And I wonder if it's a short-term gain for these organizations, because if they're not cultivating the music fans or the artists of tomorrow, at some point does the well dry up?
Yeah, it's clear that they don't seem to really care. And he compared it to sporting games. He's like, people pay thousands of dollars for that. Why can't they pay it for this? And I just feel like he's kind of missing the point. But
somebody said recently, which I thought was great, they said, and I'm not going to have the math right, but they said for just the ticket fees alone to go see Taylor Swift, you could go see like 5 or 6 amazing local shows.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of fees, I guess I want to know, especially from your time as touring, help people understand where all that money goes from a ticket price. So, like I said, I just hosted my event and I had Eventbrite fees. I passed it on to the consumer. Sometimes people don't do that. And I don't know the exact percentage, but I know, like, when Kate was playing a show, some of the ticket sales goes to the venue. And the venue also decides the ticket sales. So there was one show where I knew we could charge $15, $20 because I had produced a concert and people did pay that with her. And the venue refused and said, no, it has to be 12. And so there's that part of the discussion. And then with merch, luckily here in Seattle, I think artists get to keep all their sales. But I think some of the bigger venues, some of the venues want a percentage of that. So what's your breakdown of kind of like where the ticket price money goes?
Well, again, I'm not an expert in this area. So, but the ticket fees have gotten kind of crazy, and it covers all kinds of stuff, and that there's instances where the artists are getting a portion of those fees as well, or it's covering the promoter cut. So, like, you hear about some of these big tours where, like, a giant entity, one of the big ones, would bid 100% or 105% of what they could make, because they know that they could pay 105% of what the capacity of the venue is, because they're going to make all their money on parking, concessions, and all that other stuff. And it's why you see every summer, you're sort of like, who's going to see all these concerts, right? And then, like, you'll see, like, I'm not trying to call it one or the other, but, it'll be like, hey, this outdoor shed, we're having a summer program, $10 tickets. You could come to these 10 shows. And they're like, they don't really care. They bought the whole tour, and that to them, they're going to make their money on the parking and the concessions. So they'd rather basically give somebody a free ticket, a $10 ticket's practically a free ticket, and be able to get them to buy 4 beers and pay $40 for parking, than have only 5,000 actual ticket buyers. Yeah,
that's interesting. Is there anything else you want to say about tickets, or like what you wish could change here in Seattle?
I don't know. I guess there's always been scalping. There's always part of it. I know all kinds of people have tried different things where, like, you buy a ticket and only you can get in with your email or your, these things. I mean, it's just part of the system, and that I'd hate to have bought tickets and then, like, get sick and not be able to go and, be able to resell a ticket or something like that. But I just think it taints the fan experience, or at least in my opinion. Maybe there's some people that are out there like, this Taylor Swift show was amazing, and you won't believe I paid $5,000 for my ticket, and it was worth it, as like a bragging right or something like that. But do you want to hang out with that person? Yeah. I don't really want to hang out with that person.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, cool. I think there's a lot wrapped up in the ticket price thing. There's a lot of players, and I think the Live Nation monopoly does not help. But we're not going to solve that today, probably.
No, and I think that like any of this stuff, right? Like they consolidate and they consolidate and they consolidate, and then at some point something's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Like will we see Amazon get broke? Will AWS and Amazon get separated at some point in our lifetime? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
Like there's things like that, but
probably not.
Probably not in the next 3 years.
Yeah. Okay, so our next article is about Broadway. Not a long article, I guess, and I wasn't kind of aware of this before, but the union representing the actors of Broadway reached an agreement over the weekend, but they're still negotiating with the musicians. So it kind of talks about the role of unions and associations and bringing people together for negotiating power, all of that. So there is an association here. Have you worked with the Musicians Association of Seattle at all?
Yeah, I mean, I know some of the people involved are otherwise known as the Musicians Union. And, the Musicians Union history goes back to the early 1900s, where it was a lot more symphonic musicians. It was big bands, things like that, where people were moving around a lot more and they were like figuring out base rates for pay for folks. It got turned on its ear a little bit like in the popular music area as like more quote unquote amateurs formed bands and all that sort of stuff. And there's a lot that they do that's super positive. I know that there's a lot of people on the popular music side that have felt like it doesn't speak to them in the same sort of way. But it seems like particularly with younger folks, there's a lot of renewed energy around unionization in general. And I salute it. I mean, in the sense that you got to find some way to have a voice in this process and not just feel like you're on the receiving end all the time.
Do you feel like you were able to have, like, because I almost think Sonic Guild is kind of a form of one unified voice. Like do you feel like you have a stronger voice, whether that's with local government or, I don't know, sponsorships with companies because you're representing so many musicians?
Well, I'd say that we're always advocating for musicians.
Yes.
As a 501c3 nonprofit, we are not a political PAC or something like that can be doing that. But I mean, in general, like one of the things that drove me absolutely crazy over the years, it fucking drove me absolutely crazy, is there used to be a company called Sonic Bids. And Sonic Bids basically created like a technological platform for music festivals and stuff like that for artists to submit to be considered by that festival. And they charge the artists to submit to Jing. And then it came out later that oftentimes the festivals booked whoever they wanted to. Yep. And most of those bands didn't even get listened to, but they all paid $25 for the dream of doing it, right?
Oh,
and so I'm sort of like, there's always a better mousetrap. There's better ways to do stuff. Not all technology is bad, but I absolutely hate when new stuff hits the market and it feels like it's exploiting musicians in some way, exploiting their dreams, right?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I was applying for some of the festivals, and then a lot of them, I'd say only like a handful you can submit online. Most of them, I would email and they're like, nope, we have our person that scout that goes out and finds people, which I get. You don't want to sit through. With Seafair, we did have an open submission, and I looked through all of them. And it does take a lot of time because you've got somebody who just picked up a guitar yesterday, and then you have some really great acts, but it's right. A lot.
Well, and what's tough even more, so like we're in the midst of for our emerging artist grants, the $100,000 we're going to give out, we have in the public nominations phase right now, and we had over 625 artists be presented, right? And so we're going to have to whittle that down to who the top 10 are. And what's tough is that if we had more resources and more people, then we could maybe go through those and actually give feedback to everybody. Because that's really what a lot of people want too, is like, hey, this is really good. You're really on to something. It's not quite there yet. You need to, put it back in the oven and let it cook a little bit more. But that's really hard, right? And that's where maybe that product that I mentioned was trying to create something for that. But I don't know.
Yeah, feedback, and also the importance of, I know I'm getting off topic here, but the importance of videos. So that was another thing I did with her, is started producing some videos and taking a lot more on my phone, all of that, because the people these days want to see a YouTube video of you performing live at a festival so they can decide if they want you live at their festival or, all of that kind of stuff.
I think that's important though too, because the technology has gotten so good for home recording or recording in general. And this is a no diss. I mean, great music's great music, but sometimes you'll hear like a recording and you're like, this is the most amazing thing ever. And then you don't realize how many nips and tucks it has on it. Yeah. And you see it live and you're like, ooh. That was very aspirational, that recording so more so. And that in the festival business, people only come to the festival if it's good, right?
Yeah.
And so they have to think about that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, our last article is about a ceramics nonprofit called Pottery Northwest is moving into the Amazon headquarters. That's pretty much the whole article, is that they're moving in. I don't know if something else stood out to you, please mention it. But I wanted to use this to talk about how you are running your nonprofit.
Right.
How many years has it been?
I've been doing Sonic Guild since the end of 2018 here in Seattle. Yeah.
Did you ever consider having a physical space, or do you have an office?
We don't have a physical space, and part of that has been that I've seen a little bit. Well, A, that for what we do, we don't necessarily need one.
Yeah.
And then B, I've seen the anchor that having a physical space can have on organizations, particularly as they age and having to do the upkeep and all that sort of stuff. And that I think for us in general, that we're supporting the music ecosystem, and so why would we be going and not using, building our own music venue to compete with the other venues or things like that? So that didn't seem like the right thing for us. You mentioned the Amazon and Pottery Northwest, which I think is great. This is another one of my frustrations, and yeah, you're getting a lot of this today, so I apologize. But I think there's a lot of great stuff going on too. But what's been happening in the last couple of years, post-pandemic, a lot of the transition in retail and everything is that you see the government and other folks are really trying to reach out to the artists right now. And they're like, hey, come use this space. Bring some help us revitalize downtown. Do this, do that. And part of me is like, that's cool. But where's that energy in the good times? And so I almost wish that there was a cultural dividend. If artists and musicians are going to be brought in to try to enliven spaces and do that, when it does turn around, we don't have ownership of those spaces. We're not going to reap the reward of making that a desirable community. There's a long, long history of the LGBTQ community, musicians, artists, and all these things taking, it's the tip of the sword on gentrification. So there's negative aspects as well. But, again, here on Capitol Hill, there was a time where no business in their right mind or nobody with money wanted to have anything to do with this neighborhood because it was like, quote unquote, where it was a sketchy neighborhood or, and now like the real estate is crazy here. And so those property owners got that benefit, but the people that made it a really interesting dynamic place can't afford to live here now.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. I don't have a solve for that, but it is true. And that people bring we're doing this fundraiser or come perform or come do this free concert series. And then, how does that kind of turn back to the musician? Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough thing because I get hit up all the time from people from other nonprofits or orgs, and they're always like, hey, could you help us get this musician? Like, we want to do a fundraising concert, right? And I will say, well, a fundraising concert is the worst way to raise funds, pretty much, because you've done events, it's expensive to put on everything. And they're always like, can you help us get in touch with Dave Matthews or with Brandy Carlisle? I'm sure they'd support our cause or something. And I'm like, I'm sure they probably support what you're doing as well, but, they only have so many days in a year. They have their own foundations. They have their own charitable stuff.
Right.
And so, like anything else, if they're going to do charitable work, they want it to be raising millions of dollars, not necessarily coming. They'd rather write you a check for $10,000 to support your pea patch than come play a benefit concert for it.
That's a good point. Yes. Is there something you wish you knew when you started it back in 2018? Just the organization in general?
Boy, I think my whole life, I always wish there's stuff I knew then that I know now. I guess I'll say what I did know, and then maybe that'll trigger that. I knew that in my heart, musicians needed support in this community, and they needed a unifying voice on their behalf, because a lot of the other large forces had voices on their behalf. I knew that musicians work so hard, and they don't need much support to have an impact, right? I worked for Hewlett-Packard doing business development for 4 or 5 years, doing music and media stuff for them. And I sometimes tell this story where there's a difference between business dollars and music dollars. So like, let's say we had a team lunch for 40 people. That was $5,000. So that day, 40 people ate once. But then it's like, let's talk about what a musician can do with $5,000 to move their career forward, right? And so eating one meal versus building a career. And so sometimes when I'm fundraising or doing things, people often think at the corporate level, they're like, oh, fundraising. Well, this person's going to ask me for millions of dollars. We can't support that. And it's like, you can't support writing a check for $2,500 or $5,000 or $10,000. Like, what did you guys spend on your last team retreat? Or things like that. Or saying to people in the corporate sector, you're trying to keep your employees happy. There's a reason people move to Seattle, that it's not just the paycheck. It's like it's the food and the art and the culture and the outdoors and stuff. So how can we solve problems together? How can we make your employees' lives more vibrant by offering them things and you supporting us than you just being like, we're going to take them to a Mariners game.
Yeah.
I mean, we love the Mariners. This has been like the most amazing and heartbreaking week ever
So
with the
true.
Mariners. I feel like I was joking with somebody today. I feel like I just had the ultimate summer beach fling with the Mariners. I'm such a fair weather fan where it was like, oh, I'm so in love with them. This is great. And I was like, oh, it's not going to work out.
Yeah, I know. I watched more baseball this week than I think I have in my entire life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that. So what's next for Sonic Guild? And then we'll wrap up.
Sure. Well, our work is ongoing. We've got some exciting news that we ran our tour support grant program this year as a pilot program with support from Tito's Vodka, which is an Austin-based company. Pearl Jam and the Red Fellow Foundation recently stepped up and are going to fund us for 26 and into 27. We're continuing to do other fundraising for that. So we know that program is going to keep going. Our producers' grants are keeping it going. And that we're in the home stretch of our awards process right now to figure out who our emerging artist grant recipients are going to be. And we'll have a big gala event at the Triple Door on February 21st, 2026, where all of the grant recipients in the emerging artist grant will receive their checks and perform and all that stuff. So I'd invite anybody that
I went to it last year. It was incredible. Yeah.
The other thing I'd say to your listeners is if you're sitting there thinking like, oh, I like music, whatever, but my life and I just say to people sometimes, I'm sort of like, you remember when your life used to be fun? Like so much of like, and granted, it's not always age, but in your 20s, you're going out, you're doing stuff all the time. And then with work or family, you get separated from it. And sometimes you're like, I'd really like to go out and do something, but you look at online or you pick up a stranger or something. You're like, I don't know who these bands are. And that I think people get on the other side of 30 and they start getting into a feedback loop where they're just going to see the bands of their youth over and over again, but at bigger prices and bigger rooms. And so I would encourage people like with Sonic Guild, most of our events happen at reasonable hours between like 7 and 10 p.m. It's appointment viewing. Oftentimes there's seats for everybody. We're not asking you to stand on a cement floor
We love to sit down.
For all that time. It's a listening environment. We oftentimes have, really access to really great drinks and things like that. But it's a way of basically being part of a concert club where you're part of this community, but your involvement is helping to support the future of Seattle music.
Yeah.
And that's like what I talk about, a win-win. How can we create situations where it's a win for everybody involved? So
I think that's great advice. And, go to a Tractor Tavern show if you don't know any of the artists. Go listen. I think that's really good. Okay, we're going to close out the show with the last question I ask everybody. This is a lightning round. So what do you do to get motivated for work when you don't feel like doing anything? What's a tip?
I guess for me, walking is my superpower. I always, if I'm just stuck in a rut, if I get up and start moving around, it gets me thinking. And I do my most creative thinking when I'm walking, where it's where a lot of the ideas come from. It gets a little more challenging as the weather changes and it's pitch black out.
Right.
But I do have an orange safety vest that I can throw on at night. You might not want to use your noise canceling headphones in the middle of in a dark walk in this time of year. But
yes.
But that's one. And then music, I find to be incredibly motivational. Just listening to stuff. Again, like the synapses in my brain, being a musician for years, it sends off different things. And then just this, I find having conversations with people is just, I've had 4 or 5 ideas just sitting here, us talking about stuff. Yeah, just thinking about things like that. And so I love smart people.
Yeah.
It's like, it's addictive.
Yeah. Well, Ben, I would say you're one of those smart people, and you've done so much for music in Seattle from all of your jobs, but especially here at Sonic Guild. So for those listening, definitely check out that organization. I think they can become a member and they can go to your events and donate and all the things.
Yes, all those things. And that, I would encourage you, a couple things on closing, that you can go to sonicguild.org, to our website, that you could become a member. If you work for a company that's looking to find ways to engage your staff, please reach out. And then does your company do charitable matching? Because you very well could pay for part of your membership through your charitable match. And that way you're giving back, and not like so many people have access to those funds and they never use them. So why not help them entertain you?
Yeah.
And help musicians
and
at the same time.
They really need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, thanks for sitting down with me, Ben.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This has been The Weekly, with production assistance from Nick Patry. If you liked what you heard, rate us and write a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at info@theweeklyseattle.com. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We'll see you next time.